evening and welcome to UCSD Conversations. I'm Mary Walshock, Associate Vice Chancellor for Public Programs at the University of California, San Diego. It is my pleasure to introduce you to some of our faculty and their cutting-edge research. Please join us for an enlightening evening of conversation. Our program tonight features the Music Department's state-of-the-art recording studio and social scientists speaking out about September 11th. But first, Muir College Provost Patrick Ledden in conversation with Dr. David Tarin, Professor of Pathology and Director of the internationally renowned UCSD Cancer Center.
It's a great pleasure for me to be able to announce the designation of the University of California at San Diego as one of only 41 comprehensive cancer centers in our nation. This title carries the endorsement of the National Cancer Institute, and with it, the University of California at San Diego now becomes a member of an elite group of cancer institutions in America. This is truly great news for millions of people and their families in the San Diego area and in Imperial County. I would especially like to congratulate UCSD Chancellor Robert Dines, your Vice Chancellor, Dr. Edward Holmes, and the Center Director, Dr. David Tarin. And I want you to know that their work was critical in gaining this designation. As co-chair of the Senate Cancer Coalition and vice chair of the National Cancer Dialogue, I know that we're at a very critical point in the fight against cancer. In recent years, we've made some very dramatic breakthroughs. And believe it or not, I now believe that in my lifetime, we're going to find a cure to cancer. Thanks to the human genome, scientists are now making pioneering discoveries that allow drugs to be targeted, really like laser beams, on just the cancer cells, instead of at all cells, good cells and bad cells. So that is indeed a very special advance because it allows scientists to leave healthy cells or normal tissue unscathed. This is encouraging news because once the tentacles of cancer wrap around you and your family, it's truly a life-shattering experience. I lost my husband, Bert Feinstein, in 1978 to colon cancer that had metastasized to his liver. My husband, Richard, lost both of his parents to breast cancer. He was 10 when his father died, and we lost his mother just a few years ago. I've also lost a lot of dear friends to this terrible disease. And you know, with cancer, you're never the same after you lose a loved one. And I'll tell you what changes. You're determined to do something to end it. So ever since I've been in the Senate, I've tried to do everything I can to fight cancer. I'm very proud that we've been able to raise over $21 million net for breast cancer research because of the pioneering breast cancer stamp. And incidentally, since I've been here, we've raised research dollars for breast cancer by about 600%. And I'm also proud that we're well on our way to doubling the budget for the National Institutes of Health over 5 years. We're now in our 4th year. It's gone up 15% a year. And currently, I'm working right now on legislation to rewrite, or I should say update, the 1971 National Cancer Act. It's been updated a few times, but it's really an old act. And I hope that the legislation I'll introduce in the fall will increase resources for cancer research, will improve insurance coverage for cancer treatments, train a better cancer care workforce, reduce ethnic and geographic disparities in cancer care, and really move us toward quality cancer care for all of our citizens. That's something we don't have today. So once again, let me just say it's a great pleasure for me to make this announcement. I'm very proud of the University of California at San Diego. It is a big day, and I'd like to say congratulations to all of you. You are now the 41st National Cancer Center. Thank you very much.
I'm Pat Ledden, host of UCSD Conversations. It is not often that we have this program introduced by a United States Senator, but since the topic of our conversation today is the UCSD Cancer Center, we thought it appropriate to start the program with this recent announcement by Senator Feinstein of this important designation of our cancer center as one of the comprehensive centers, one of 41 in the United States. My guest today is Dr. David Tarin, who's the director of the UCSD Cancer Center. He trained as a physician at Oxford University in England. Before joining our faculty in 1997, he was at Oxford University with an impressive array of titles. He was Fellow of Green College, he was the Nuffield Reader in Pathology, and he was also director of the Cancer Diagnosis and Metastases Research Laboratory, perhaps I should say laboratory, all at Oxford University. A very distinguished set of titles indeed. David, thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
This designation of our cancer center, of which you're the director, as a comprehensive one by the National Cancer Institute, is an important milestone. But considering what an arduous task this is, what a long journey it is, I think we treat it only as a milestone, only as a marker by the side of the road. We still have a long way to go. Is that a fair remark?
Absolutely. It is a very gratifying situation that we've been recognized by the National Cancer Institute to have the merit to receive this designation. But it does put us on the threshold now of great opportunities, because having been recognized in this way, it improves our recruitment opportunities for bringing in new outstanding faculty and doctors to treat our patients. It improves our opportunities for teaching and education. It improves our opportunities for attracting brilliant new research workers. And also, not least, it raises our profile from the point of view of people who might be interested in giving financial support to the center and to cancer research generally.
Now, when we say it's a comprehensive center, that means it covers a broad range of research, both basic and clinical, in cancer and the treatment of cancer?
Yes, it does. The designation comprehensive, when given by the National Cancer Institute, recognizes that there is high merit in basic cancer research in the laboratories of the Cancer Center, coupled with outstanding research in prevention and control of the disease, and clinical research and interaction between all those different components. In addition, we have to satisfy the National Cancer Institute that we provide an information service for the surrounding community, that we provide opportunities for educating them how to interpret that information, and also that we provide outreach services to enable the population around us who have, as a result of this information and education, become more understanding of the problem, to come in and get more regular screening and other mechanisms for improving their reduction of risk.
So it really covers the full range of sort of basic science. I assume that means biochemistry and molecular biology and virology and bench work.
All of that, plus research on the tumor itself, the growth of the tumor, the pathology of the tumor, the spread of the cancer in the human body, plus its susceptibility to drugs or to radiation, and how to enhance the tumor's susceptibility to those agents so that we have better opportunities to try and destroy the tumor and cause minimal handicap to the patient themselves. In addition to which, we've got innovative programs here which are unique in the nation for studying cancer symptom control, because a patient who receives the diagnosis of cancer doesn't just have a lump in the body. They don't just have a malignant, life-threatening disease, but they also have an impact on the complete sensory experience of being human. For example, they become anxious.
Sure.
They become depressed. They become troubled by pain. All of these are sensory things.
Pain would be a serious issue.
These are all, well, anxiety is a big serious issue too. So there are things which are purely abstract, like worry and anxiety and grief and depression. But there are also tangible things like pain. And in addition to that, there are symptoms which are created by the treatment itself. So we are researching how to ameliorate that. And finally, some of the treatment, for example, if there's a brain tumor, results in removal of some parts of the body, which can cause handicap. And there's rehabilitation needed for that. So all of cancer symptom control is concerned with that side of it. So we are wanting to not just be concerned with the tumor and the lump, but with the patient's complete experience,
yes,
and trying to help them through that.
Yes, and then now does this mean trials of various sorts of treatment, clinical trials of various kinds?
It does, and the trials are both what we call therapeutic trials. We're trying new types of treatments, but there are also trials which we are trying new methods of early diagnosis. There are new trials of trying to reduce risk by altering diet or altering lifestyle, stopping tobacco smoking, taking more exercise. All of these are being scientifically examined as to how individuals who might have a risk can minimize that risk.
Yes, the prevention is much better than cure.
Of course.
I mean, and is that part of the outreach activity of the center as well? I mean, to help educate the community as the importance of prevention?
Exactly. All of that is part
no
of the
smoking
outreach
campaigns among teenagers, for example, sensible use of chemicals. And
yes, and we've got a tobacco helpline here, for example, where people who are trying to quit smoking can call in on a telephone line and get help with it. So there's all of that kind of service being provided to our surrounding community.
So this is a big center.
Yes.
I mean, 1,000 people?
Approximately 1,500.
1,500. Yes. That's a lot. These are
If you
scientists,
count
technicians,
technicians,
the whole
doctors,
range,
nurses,
the whole range.
Administrators, all of them have a part to play, and they're all equally important to us.
That's a big set of people too. And your job is, in addition to being a physician, is to help coordinate all of that.
That's correct. I'm trying to do research as well.
A big job indeed. The Cancer Center is currently carrying on all of these projects, but in a large number of places. It's spread all over the place. We're now planning to build, I've seen the plans for it. It looks like it's going to be a very handsome new cancer center. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yes. At the moment, our activities, the Cancer Center's activities as a whole, are scattered in 24 different locations on this campus and in 2 different hospitals, which are 13 miles apart.
Yes.
While we have managed to satisfy the National Cancer Institute of the merit of the work going on here, it's almost a miracle that we've been able to do so, because it's very difficult to conduct work of that quality if the people are scattered in that way. Obviously, you are able to move faster, to generate more innovative, interesting, exciting ideas if people are all closer together, meeting one another in corridors, in elevators,
having lunch together.
Having lunch together, all that sort of thing. That culture improves the advance of things much faster. So we really need to have this endeavor now located in a single facility, or at least much of it incorporated in a single facility, because you can't get all that number of operations into even this new building. And that it should be near a hospital, and that it within the Cancer Center building itself should be both clinical and research operations going on side by side, as well as outreach operations, so that the integration of all these things is maximized.
So there will be some clinical activity of some kinds in
the entire ground floor of the new Cancer Center is going to be clinical. And then above
so what sorts of activities will take place there? Clinical trial sorts of things?
There will. There's a large clinical trials office, and the patients who go there every day to be seen will be invited to participate in clinical trials. And so the clinical work will be intimately housed next to all the research on the problem, so that basic researchers and people who are doing research on prevention and control will be bumping into physicians on a routine basis every day. And so the opportunity for organizing collaborative work will be enhanced.
And seminars and all sorts of interactions
that will go on in there,
more,
because there's going to be a large auditorium in this cancer center as well, where we can hold not only seminars and lectures but also conferences.
Oh, bringing in people from outside the cancer center
and that
itself.
will be the aim, to do that, so that it will become a magnet for interesting people to come here to hear about what we do, so that we can hear about what they do, and maximize information exchange.
But we are I think a major part of the cancer research here in San Diego, but not the only part by a long shot, in providing a place where others who are actively engaged in this activity will be important, I think.
It will. We want to give great credit to all our partners in the San Diego area, both clinically and research-wise. There are two other National Cancer Institute designated cancer centers in this city. Both of them are basic science centers where there are no patients seen, but they still have important discoveries being made which are being tested in clinical trials. These two centers are the Salk Institute, has a cancer center, and so does the Burnham Institute. In addition, and also there's a Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center. And in addition to those research organizations, there's a number of other hospitals and healthcare organizations which deliver cancer care to the patients of San Diego region.
Sure. So our reaching out to them and bringing them in is an important part of the whole comprehensive center.
And I can't stress too strongly how much I feel that although we hold a comprehensive cancer center designation, we are part of the community. We want to interact with our colleagues who are giving the best care that we can to the people of the city. It is not for our own advancement that we are pleased with this designation, but we're pleased that it can enhance collaboration and interaction for the benefit of the patients of this region.
Southern California. Yes.
That's exactly what we're here for. It's to serve them.
Yes, but it's an exciting opportunity.
Oh, it's tremendously exciting.
Yes.
And the opportunities that are growing here are very exciting, because we come into medicine to try to do something about disease and for patients, to ameliorate their suffering, and if we can have enhanced opportunities to do that, is very satisfying.
That's very happy, because you're serving lots of people that way, more than just the single patient.
We can give a much better service, and we will be able to give an even better service when this new cancer center building is completed.
You've had some very generous gifts from the Moores and the Katzens, and I assume from others. That project is still underway?
It is, and we're still hoping that we're going to receive more donations, because the building fund is not yet completed, and we also are looking for further gifts so that we can endow chairs in the discipline of cancer research, and we can improve our recruitment possibilities. And so there is still an ongoing drive to raise further finances for this project.
It must be an exciting time to be doing this. I mean, any time is exciting to work on such a complex, difficult problem. Cancer isn't a single thing, it's lots of things, I gather. But this right now, with all of the products in a certain sense of chemistry and physics, I mean, with all of the advances in the genome, this must be a very exciting time to be thinking about the solutions to these various problems presented by chemistry.
Well, it is. I think we're in a golden age of medical research. I think in centuries to come, they'll look back on this time globally, I don't just mean in San Diego, they'll look back on this time as being a period of a renaissance, like the Italian Renaissance, and it's an exciting thing to be living at a time that
Future
generations will look back on this as us coming out of the dark ages of science. So
being in Florence in 1400. Right?
That's more or less it again. Yes, yes. Well, you see, this has been captured by the advances in our understandings of genetics and the way the genes work to govern the function of living cells in the body. The body is composed of something like 300 trillion cells. It's therefore a community of cells. Each cell has a defined job to do. That job is dictated by the genes within the cell. But they all come from a single cell. And that cell divides and produces different cell lineages, which, for example, produce your skin, your liver, your brain, your eyes, and so on. And those cell lineages have to interact with each other to maintain, first of all, to create the complex organization of the body, and then to maintain it. Because if you injure yourself, the repair processes involve all those cells interacting together again to repair it. And so the maintenance of the body architecture is as important as the creation in the first place in the development of the embryo. But the breakdown of it is what we know as a local breakdown of that interaction between different cellular communities is what we know as cancer.
And that's a complex thing then to unravel. The so-called war on cancer is now 30 years old approximately. There have been some triumphs in that.
Oh, yes.
The war isn't over,
no.
But there have been some victories. Is that true?
The war is certainly not over. It's a long march. There's going to be more and more skirmishes and pitched battles on the way. Yeah. But I think that we've made enormous progress in the last 30 to 50 years. I'll give you just one example. A child 30 years ago would have had much diminished chances of survival from cancer. Something like 30% may have survived from cancer in before 1970. Now you would expect that over 70% ought to survive and be cured.
Remarkable. That's remarkable.
So that is a tremendous stride forward. There are other examples. Breast cancer in women has improved. The chances of survival have improved considerably. Of course, it depends on what stage the patient presents. And part of that advance in the management of breast cancer has been to improve early detection of the disease, so that one can handle it before the disease is disseminated around the body. Because one of the major problems with this, with the treatment of cancer is this property of the tumor cells being able to crawl out of the tumor, get into blood vessels, and be carried by the blood to distant sites where they can seed and make secondary tumors. Rather like blowing on a dandelion, you see the seeds disseminate around the garden, they create new dandelions. And that's what a tumor's like. It disseminates seedlings which grow elsewhere. The difficulty when that happens is that you have more difficulty in treating the disease because it's not localized. And to focus the attack on a single site is much easier than to try and remove hundreds of little tumors all around the body.
We've had 30 years plus. Look on the near horizon, the next few years. Do you see some other comparable victories possible?
Oh yes, I think we're inching forward all the time. For example, let me go back to the breast cancer story. Within the last 10 years, there have been great advances in new drugs, in early detection, in making it more likely that a patient is going to survive, although of course we still lose many of our patients, sadly. But it is because of the fact that we have recognized that you don't have to take the whole breast off, you don't have to mutilate the patient unless the tumor is very big or is in a very unfavorable location. If it's obviously in an unfavorable location, you may have to. But in general, lumpectomy followed by radiotherapy has been a very effective, and chemotherapy has been a very effective means of managing the local tumor and trying to either prevent or knock off any tiny seedlings that may already have spread. Now, those understandings have only really been reached as a result of clinical trials in the last 20 years or so. And those clinical trials were groundbreaking. It therefore is important to emphasize that our progress is made not just by bench work in the laboratory, but also by those discoveries being put into clinical trials. Now, a trial is a trial of that particular type of treatment matched against the standard of care type of treatment at the moment. So if standard of care treatment fails now, then a new type of treatment could be validly compared against that. But it needs to be done under rigorously controlled scientific conditions so that there's complete safety for the patient and that they know exactly what's going on. So that's what we're trying to do here, is bring forward many of those treatments into clinical practice for the benefit of the patient. And the main thing is that we have to be rigorously concerned with scientific quality. We have to be rigorously concerned with conducting the trial with utmost safety and with explaining to the patient exactly what's going on. But with the benefit of their involvement, we make new discoveries which help further patients.
And great progress.
Yes.
Great progress.
Yes. But I would say that the clinical trial is the great way in which we can test whether what we think is going to be an advance is truly an advance.
You don't know it until you do the trial, yes. But on that very optimistic note, actually, I'd like to thank my guest, Dr. David Tarin, for a very enthusiastic conversation about this marvelous opportunity that we now have here at UCSD. Mary, back to you.
Next on UCSD Conversations, a look behind the scenes at the music department's recording studio with engineer Joseph Kucera.
I started as a musician. I played piano as a youngster. I moved into mallets in high school and in college. Most of my musical training was in music theory and composition. I worked a lot in electronic music, actually in a specific facet of electronic music called musique concrète. And that's where you record natural sounds in a specific way so that you alter the frequency response or you create a unique sound through the recording of either traditional or non-traditional sources. In my freshman year in college, I went to UC Santa Barbara. There was a new recording studio that had just come online. And so I applied and was hired into the internship program there. And so I spent the next 4 years working in that studio with the chief engineer there, working in the studio, and in off hours, he allowed me to use the studio to work on my own things. So I was able to spend a lot of time just experimenting with mics and with different recording situations. And most of my work was in music theory composition. And then I mentored with Dave Hancock, who was the engineer at UC Santa Barbara. Dave did a lot of freelance work. He was a recording engineer that did a lot of commercial work for some of the ad agencies in town, so I assisted him in on-location shoots. I composed music for some of the commercials. I was also very active in a theater company called the Ensemble Theater Project, and was a resident sound designer for that. So I spent about 3 years doing sound design for live theater. So it was a relatively well-rounded exposure into the business, from live theater. I composed for dance, I composed for film, and studio work, as well as more theoretical recording in the electronic music. Very early on in this process, I joined the Audio Engineering Society. And the LA section is very active in seminars and various recording programs. So I took a lot of their seminars, both through individuals in LA and through things with the society at their convention, through various seminars at their conventions. At UCSD, I'm the chief engineer in the Warren Recording Facility, and that encompasses many responsibilities within the department. I record and produce many of the recording projects for the music faculty here. I'm responsible for the sound systems for most of the faculty concerts and many of the student concerts. I have a staff that works for me recording most of the student events. To a certain extent, I try and stay relatively involved in all of those aspects. I have to delegate quite a bit of it, but I try and look over the tech sheets and understand the requirements of each one and communicate that to my staff so that the best possible recordings within the budget we have to work within can be achieved. The music that is played here is very difficult, to say the least. And I think my ability to understand what the composers and performers are trying to achieve from both a performer and a compositional point of view allows me to understand the problems that I'm going to encounter as a recording engineer and what I feel is important to convey to the listener. When I'm setting up a session, I start with the score and with understanding the music, and I kind of put on my producer hat and try and figure out what I want the final product to be. For an orchestral project, you have to consider the period that the music is from. Is it early music? Is it Baroque? Is it Romantic? Is it a huge symphony? Is it, a small chamber work? And all of these kind of dictate the spacing of the microphones, how wide the sound field is. Do you want the ensemble to feel like a small ensemble when you listen to it, or do you want it to sound like an orchestra of 200? And to a certain extent, that's dictated by the spacing of the microphones. In addition to that, I have to look at the forces that are involved in the particular production. The La Jolla Symphony is an interesting dilemma, if you will, because the repertoire is not homogeneous. They don't do a romantic symphony and similar types of, say, an overture, and where it's the same basic period of music that would require the same basic miking. They'll do everything from a Baroque, small ensemble to a rather large tone poem to a full symphony, all in the same concert. For remote shoots, I use a variety of formats. We'll use DATs for stereo work. For the symphony, I record onto D88, which is a digital multi-track format. For the La Jolla Symphony concert that we just did, I used the D88 for 3 of the pieces, and then on a 4th piece, I added a hard disk recorder called an MMR. And that particular machine I used for the chorus and for the harp. And that's because I needed the flexibility in the final mix down to blend the individual orchestra with the chorus, as we've talked about earlier. And on occasion, I've submixed various aspects to keep myself to 8 tracks for my mastering. But for this particular concert, I was really concerned with the balance of the choir with the balance of the orchestra, because the piece is very delicate. So I wanted to try and leave as many options as possible for the final mix. One of the strategies that I use quite extensively are labels. So I'll go through, and when I'm setting my microphones up on stage, I set them up left to right as the audience would see them, front to back. So the microphones across the front of the ensemble are typically, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the next set back are 5, 6, 7, 8, and the next set back would be 9, 10, 11, 12, or however they're arranged. And then I label the console, I label the microphone preamps, I label all the tape decks, and what that allows me to do is if I see a problem at any point in the signal chain, then I don't have to go back and try and recursively think my signal path and figure out now what microphone is feeding that particular channel, because if we're doing submixes where I'm taking several microphones and mixing them into a stereo mix and then putting on a tape deck, then I may have an overload on a tape deck, but there may be 6 microphones feeding those 2 channels. So I have to, it really helps to be able to label everything along the signal path, and then it's very easy to follow where everything is to keep things straight. Because a lot of times, again for the La Jolla Symphony, I'm constantly repatching. That I never have enough microphone preamps, and I always have way too many microphones. So, it's really important to keep the labels straight, and that way it's very easy to document each piece and to kind of then record by the numbers, if you will. The formats that I record in varies from project to project. For all of the studio work, we record directly onto hard disk. The system that I use here is Sonic Solutions. It's a mastering system. Is originally designed for mastering CDs, and it has a very flexible editing module that gives the engineer tremendous flexibility in editing. Now, the fact that I can technically accomplish an edit, and I can in fact, and have cut in individual notes, doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to work musically. So it's a very interesting aesthetic question to decide if you have the technical capability to do very minute editing, does it in fact make musical sense? I see the audio industry going in 2 directions. One is formats of convenience, shall we say, the MP3 and mini disc, the kinds of formats that one might play in their car, you'd use while you're jogging, or merely for the situation where you want sound, but it doesn't have to be ultra high quality. And conversely, I think the industry will still be moving toward a state-of-the-art, very high quality format, which currently appears to be the DVD-A, which is an audio-only format that is part of the DVD whole format. New DVD players, as of about a year ago, will play DVD-A formatted discs, and it's looking very promising. The problem is getting the industry to accept it and to make product for the public.
Finally tonight, an array of social scientists offer their views on the roots of Islamic rage as they try to understand what happened on September 11th.
So in recent weeks we have been obsessed, for good reason, with a rich Yemeni or the rich Saudi of Yemeni background, who first made a reputation for rallying the cause of the Afghani Muslims against Soviet occupation, Soviet oppressors, and then has built over time a following and what appears to be a sophisticated organization in the pursuit of criminal acts worldwide in the name of Islam. We have also been awed by the Islamic aura he has projected. Osama bin Laden and his followers' rhetoric, on the one hand, and reactions to what has been labeled as Islamic terrorism in this country and Europe, on the other, have led to a sudden interest in Islam and the Islamic world. Needless to say, religion has provided the inspiration, the vocabulary, and the cultural symbols around which a variety of social, political, and cultural movements have crystallized in the Middle East and the rest of the Islamic world. And these movements have occasionally drawn upon novel formulations and interpretations, or have been infused with fresh vigor as a result of new vantages, perhaps a charismatic leadership, or certain social and cultural conjunctures. Now, in this context of sort of Islamic movements developing in a period of contact, intensifying contact with the West, let me first say a few things about Wahhabism that has its origins in 18th century Arabia, about which we have been hearing quite a bit. Of course, a religious thinker by the name of Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab offered at this time a traditionalist interpretation of Islam based on what were assumed to be literal meanings of religious texts, or literal meaning of the Quran. Now, this notion of the literal meaning of the Quran is complicated in Islam because it is considered to be, by Muslims, the word of God. Now, this interpretation entailed a sharp criticism of the Ottoman government and Ottoman dynasty, which of course held sway over the Middle East at the time, up to the borders of Iran, and Iran was the only other sovereign state at the time in the Middle East. The Wahhabi teachings were adopted by the tribal Al Saud family, which became the militant arm of Wahhabism at the beginning of the 19th century. And the Wahhabis waged war against the Ottoman government, which again, if I understand it correctly, is legitimate in Wahhabi doctrine, in other words, singling out a Muslim group or a Muslim government as, if you like, the object of jihad. The Ottoman government, which was steadily losing ground against European rivals. And the Wahhabis held that the deviation of Ottoman rulers from the norms of Islam was responsible for the misfortunes of the Islamic State. And the Wahhabis were confined with great difficulty after major efforts by the Ottomans and their proxies to their tribal lands in eastern Arabia until the end of the Ottoman Empire. In the 1920s, of course, the family of Al Saud rallied now somewhat tempered Wahhabi principles to expand his following in Arabia after the demise of the Ottoman Empire to found the modern state of Saudi Arabia. Now, bin Laden accuses the Saudi dynasty of having deviated from Wahhabi principles, while the Taliban have emerged as sort of the true Wahhabis with their vision of purist Islam. Now, having said something about Wahhabism, I'd like to emphasize that Wahhabism was hardly, or it has hardly been in the mainstream of Islamist movements. The mainstream Islamist movements in the 19th century addressed the transformations arising from a new set of diplomatic and economic relations with Europe, and administrative, social, and cultural change in the Ottoman Empire and in Iran. The Middle Eastern governments attempted to reverse, or at least arrest, territorial losses by restructuring their institutions, first among them the military, along European models. The mainstream Islamist movements of the 19th century crystallized in this conjuncture. They were espoused by Muslims who were closely familiar with European culture and politics, and with the relative weakness of the Muslim states. They argued that all that was admitted to be responsible for Europe's advances, such as representative government, constitutions, scientific pursuit, etc., was inherent in Islam. The Muslims only needed to look at the early period of Islam, when the Islamic world enjoyed unquestionable superiority over the West. Now, this line of thought did not call for a return to medieval times, but to seek inspiration in early, uncorrupted Islam. And implicit in this was a criticism of modern governments for their wholesale adoption of Western institutions, ideas, and culture, without, again, necessarily implementing democratic change. This reformist ideology was also rallied against what was perceived to be the political, military, and economic onslaught of the West. It was as critical of Western culture or Western cultural and economic imperialism as of autocratic government. Now, when these new imperialist energies were unleashed in Europe after 1880, Islamic unity emerged as the basis of the response to imperialist expansion, not only in the Ottoman realm, but also in Iran and Central Asia. The confrontation with European imperialism led Muslim leaders to reinvent the political traditions of Islam. It was in this context, for instance, that the institution of the caliphate, the political religious leadership of the Muslim community, was reclaimed, and the concept of jihad as holy war was invoked during World War I. So when the Middle East entered the nation-state era, which, it has to be remembered, occurred relatively recently, and as a result of accomplished facts violating much touted principles of self-determination, Islam continued to permeate political and intellectual thought. It also provided the ideological framework for community structures, and the nation-state governments were unable or unwilling, the kind of structures that the nation-state governments were unable or unwilling to provide. Now, when we ponder about the radicalization of Islamic movements today, we should try to understand it in the context of the persistence of authoritarian structures in much of the Islamic world, continued Western political, cultural, and economic overbearance, and the legacy of an opportunistic approach and inconsistent policies vis-à-vis the Islamists by modern governments everywhere. Thank you.
We usually are looking for a neat causal relationship of if A, then B. And in this case, the question is, that has been asked, or whether a statement that has been made, is that if we solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, would Osama bin Laden go away? The fact is that the Israeli-Palestinian problems have not been uppermost on bin Laden's list, which explains why he perpetrated acts against the United States, even when the Oslo process, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, seemed to be thriving. In fact, on his interview on Al Jazeera television in Qatar, the day after the bombings began, on his right sat a man by the name of al-Zawahiri, who is the head of Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and some believe he's potentially the successor of bin Laden. He was the man responsible for murdering President Sadat, who signed, of course, the peace agreement, the Camp David agreement with Israel. So bin Laden is not for a solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to compromise or a peace process. There is simply no correlation between Al-Qaeda's activities and the content or tenor of Israeli-Palestinian relations. I, in fact, invite you to read two of his declarations. I can't do it now, but in August '96, he published a declaration in which he declared war on the United States. And in February 1998, a fatwa under the heading of the World Islamic Jihad against Jews and Crusaders, in which he declared it to be the individual duty of every Muslim to kill American soldiers and civilians wherever they might be found. In fact, he does not use the word Crusaders and Israelis, or Crusaders and Zionists, there is a very clear anti-Semitic element in his approach. But the question is, when you read these extreme views, why is it that he finds so much acceptance? Some of it tacit, or most of it may be tacit, some of it much more active in the Middle East. And the reason I believe, and Hassan already began describing the background, is that bin Laden is the most extreme manifestation of an Islamic revival movement, of a revitalization movement. And in the period since the 1970s, or to be more precise, since the 1973 war and the oil embargo, the Middle East and the Islamic world in general began experiencing this Islamic revival. The resources that began to be poured into the region allowed, it seems for the first time, the reversal of that nostalgic mindset which saw the Middle East as being overwhelmed by the highly successful West. Again, in bin Laden's interview, he talked about 80 years of humiliation. And as Hassan mentioned, of course, 80 years ago was when the Ottoman Empire was, last Islamic empire was dismembered. As a consequence of the infusion of money into the region, memory, so to speak, gave rise to desire, as one commentator put it. That also explains in part why the Middle East and the Islamic world are the only region that has successfully avoided or forestalled most or not all of the post-Cold War reforms, democratization and liberalization that have been espoused in the rest of the world. This, the fact is that in the Middle East alone, there is an alternative ideological position, and that is Islamic alternative to our new world order, our global world order. The New Islamic revival invoked various Islamic traditions, and one of them was Wahhabism, an 18th century revitalization movement in the Arabian Peninsula, which is more aggressive, evangelical, more ascetic, more scripturally literalist, more xenophobic, and more intolerant than any other form, and more militant, I should add, than any other form of Islam. In the name of Wahhabism, Saudi citizens and the Saudi government, which have spent about $10 billion a year, proselytizing the faith all over the world. As a consequence, Islamic interpretation has been seized by militants of a variety of stripes who read out of Islam those who don't agree with the simplistic and rigid formulations. The legitimate Islamic pluralism of the past is not there anymore. And it's not due to its success. If you look at the Islamic Republic of Iran, you'll see that it has not done so well on its part. For example, it had a very hard time figuring out what Islamic economic policy should be. Now, without realizing the importance of this Islamic revival as the context of bin Laden's jihad, we are going to end up with all kinds of misguided observations, one of which I'm going to mention briefly is that bin Laden and his type of terror are children of poverty. Radical Islam has sprung from economic growth and upward mobility and not the other way around. Obviously, bin Laden himself does not come from a poor family, though he probably by now has spent all his fortune. More money keeps pouring in, as I mentioned, in large part from Saudi Arabia. The terrorists that carried out the attacks came from middle-class families. Some had higher education, were students in Germany and other places, and they were highly politicized. In fact, I'm not even sure if they would be, by traditional Muslim definitions, considered to be very good Muslims. There are reports that they drank, went to strip joints, and in Muhammad Atta's letter of instruction for the day of the attack, he reminds his colleagues in terror not to forget to say the morning prayer, something that no devout Muslim would ever forget.
there's a certain model of journalism that's based on what I call sphere of legitimate controversy coverage, which is based on balance, fairness, objectivity, and so on. But that there was another journalistic mode, which I called sphere of consensus reporting, in which the journalists were kind of priests of civil religion, if you like, that celebrating consensus values and so on. And that actually turned out, kind of to my surprise, to be probably the best known thing I ever wrote, those few little pages where the sphere of consensus appears, and I suppose it's partly because sphere of consensus events keep coming back and are very important. This is the supreme example that I have ever seen, really, particularly in the first week, where you have this very strong emphasis in the news coverage on America pulling together, national solidarity, we are all united. Final thing that I want to say a word about is Al Jazeera. An hour after the attack started, the Al Jazeera, this satellite broadcasting system based in Qatar, showed the tape of bin Laden's response to Bush. Since then, there's been a lot of controversy. Even before that, the U.S. government was calling on the government of Qatar to crack down on Al Jazeera. A little bit, I don't know a lot. There may actually be others on the panel who know even more about Al Jazeera than I do, but let me say a little about what I know about it. And I think that this is an important change in the structure of the flow of information in the world. In the mid-1990s, there was a proliferation of Arab language satellite services, partly, according to many accounts, as a kind of response to greater demand for information in the wake of the Gulf War. Al Jazeera has become the most important and is generally seen as the most independent of these. It's based in Qatar, funded in part by the government of Qatar, but primarily a commercial enterprise. A lot of the journalists are highly professionalized journalists. Many of them actually came over from the BBC Arabic language service when it was pulled off the air in 1996, and it has a reputation for much more open reporting, covering dissenting points of view, a lot more plural reporting than you generally have found in the Arab world. This is the only international satellite service that has an office in Kabul right now and is playing quite an important role because it's the only source of pictures from Afghanistan at this point, as well as the main source for information from bin Laden and those who support him. And I think that it is a very significant factor in the sense that it makes the flow of information worldwide much more plural than it would be otherwise. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of continuing controversy about it. In general, the public relations side of this war is obviously very important. I noticed there was a very interesting statement in yesterday's New York Times from the Pakistani official who, the president of Pakistan had said that he hoped the air war would end in a day or two, and his remarks had to be clarified. And another official was saying, well, of course, he didn't mean that all of the bombing was going to stop in a day or two, but he does hope that the sort of bombing in major cities that it's shown on television worldwide, that will stop within a day or two. And it does illustrate the importance of this flow of pictures and information in this conflict.